Okay, let's get started here with our foot video. Today we're going to talk about solving equations using addition or subtraction. And a couple key points here I want to go over, and you don't need to write these points down, although you may want to, but if you just want to listen, that's fine. First key point is you must show, and this is for my class, so in order to get full credit, you must show your work to both sides of the equation. Okay, I have a lot of people who try to shortcut this or do it in their head. Okay, I know that you can do some of these problems in your head. I know that you can try a shortcut and you're going to say you're showing me what's going on, but you really need to focus on the correct mathematical process here. So you do have to show your work to both sides, and this is key when you're doing any solving equations, is you must do the same thing to both sides of the equations. And by the same thing, I mean you must be adding or subtracting the same value. And today we're not going to really worry about it, but there are ways of writing the same value in different ways. For example, just simplistically, I could say I subtract 10 from one side, and then I subtract 5 from the other side, and then I subtract 5 again. That would be subtracting 10, so you would be doing the same thing even though you're writing it differently. You would never do any problems like that, but there are times when we do have to write things in different formats, although they represent the same thing. So you have to make sure you do the same thing to both sides. So if you're adding to both sides, you must add. If you're subtracting, you must subtract. You got to do the same thing to both sides. Okay, let's go on to our examples for today. And you want to make sure you write down these examples that I go over. Our first example is using subtraction. So I just have two examples, A and B, for using subtraction. So I have my problem in A, W plus 22 equals negative 10. So I want to figure out what W is. When I'm solving equations, that means I want to figure out what the variable is. So I have one variable for what we're starting with. These are all one-step problems, and I just want to know how to solve that. What do I need to do to answer this problem? What is W? And without doing it in our head, how mathematically can I prove? And so what I'm going to do is I want to get W by itself. So when I solve equations, my goal is to get the variable by itself. I want it to be the only thing on that side of the equation. Okay, so since I have W plus 22, I want to get rid of the plus 22. That means I want to get it to 0, and that's why our identity property comes in, because anything plus 0 equals itself. So we want to get W plus 0. So in order to get that, I want to take 22 away from the left side of the equation. That's going to leave me with W plus 0, which is just going to be W. Now on the right side of the equation, I have to do the same thing to both sides. Since I took 22 away on the left side, I must take 22 away on the right side. Now I can do the math. Now it's negative 10 minus 22. You can use your calculator, so negative 10 minus 22 in your calculator. Okay, that is a minus sign, so it's just negative 10 minus 22. If you're doing it in your head, remember you're starting at negative 10 and you're going 22 more to the left, so that's going to get you to negative 32 is your final answer. So W equals negative 32. Okay, for the second example, I'm going to do the same thing. This time I have 32 plus Y equals negative 11. So this time, I want to get Y by itself. I have a positive 32 in front there. So to get rid of that positive 32, I'm going to subtract 32 from both sides. That's going to get that to 0. 0 plus Y. Our goal in adding and subtracting equations is to get the value that is with the variable to 0. So whatever I have to do to get that side to 0, because I want 0 plus my variable. That keeps my variable by itself. That's going to be Y equals negative 11 minus 32 is negative 43. Okay, and that's how we use subtraction. Okay, if you need to pause, go ahead and pause. I'm going to move on to adding next. All right, example 2, adding using addition to find these. I have my first problem. This time I have the variable on the right side. That does not change my process. I'm always trying to figure out, if you think of my previous two problems, I'm always adding or subtracting the numbers that are on the same side as the variable. So I first want to locate my variable. It's on the right side, so I'm going to be using the number on the right side in this example. So I have 62 equals M minus 15. I still want to get M by itself. I'm subtracting 15 from M, so I want to get that to 0. So if I subtract 15 from something to get it back to 0, I add 15. Okay, these are called inverse operations when I do that, because the inverse of adding is subtracting, and then later the inverse of multiplying is dividing. Those are inverse operations when I do that. So I'm going to add 15 to that side. That's going to give me M. And then the other side I'm also going to add 15. And 62 plus 15 is 77. So M equals 77. And you can always go back and check your work. Plug in 77 for M. 77 minus 15 is 62. So both sides equal each other, which is what you want. You have to keep both sides equal to each other. In example B, It may look like a subtraction problem because I have a plus r. So a lot of people think, oh, I got to subtract 22 because I'm adding r. But you're adding r. The minus 22, that's a negative 22 I have in front. So how do I get negative 22 back to 0? I have to add 22. Okay, because negative 22 plus 22, it's the opposites of each other. So I have to add 22. So although people think this is you need to subtract to solve this because they see a plus sign between the number and the r, I'm actually going to solve this using addition because I have a negative 22 to lead the way. So that gives me a negative 22 plus 22. That gives me my 0. 0 plus r is r. And then I add 22 on that side. I must add 22 on this side. This time I have negative 14 plus 22. So there are different signs. Okay, so the difference is 8, and I have more positives than negatives, so it's positive 8. But here's a good example where if you have a negative in front, even though there's a plus sign in between the number and the variable, you're still solving by adding because you've got to get that number to 0. Our goal in adding and subtracting is to add or subtract the number with the variable to get it to 0. And when I talked about earlier, you must show your work to both sides, you must show your work exactly like I have here. So how I have in this screen and how I had in the last screen, you write it right underneath the problems. That's how you show your work. It's not a lot of work, but it must be done. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next example. If you need to pause, go ahead and pause. Okay, this is our last example. I have one in this slide and one on the next slide. So in this example, I want you to write and solve an equation. And I really want you to focus on writing equations that you have to solve. So don't start solving the problem ahead of time. You must have a number and a variable on one side equals a number on the other side. You need to practice that format because as the problems get more complicated, it'll make it easier to put them together. So in this example, we have the weight of a trailer is 2,150 pounds. When you drive through a weigh station, the scale reads 3,375 pounds. What is the weight of the horse? Well, if I wanted to know the total weight, I have to think of that. The total weight is 3,375. So that's my total weight. What makes up my total weight? Well, the trailer and the horse. So the trailer is 2,150, and the horse, we don't know. So I'm going to do h, the horse, plus the trailer, 2,150, equals my total weight. So you kind of got to think of the parts equal the whole amount. And we don't know one of the parts, okay? So we need to find it. That's how I want you guys to write your equation. So I really want you to focus. And on tests and quizzes, when I say write an equation, it has to be an equation. You cannot write it already solved. Then I'm going to solve it. You must practice your work of solving it. Again, you got to show your work this way. And when you do this, you're going to get h plus 0, which is h equals, I do my work here, and I'm going to get 1,225. This is a word problem, pounds. 1,225 pounds. Okay, and that's your answer. But you really have to focus on writing your equation with an equal sign. If it's an adding or subtracting one, it's typically the parts equaling the whole for adding, and then we'll show you in the subtracting, it's usually working with taking away something to figure out how much you spent in a given day. So that's usually total amount minus the amount that you don't know what you spent to get left over. Okay, let's do another example. If you need to pause this, go ahead. I'm going to move on. Okay, in our next example, we have last month, Tyrone's bill for phone and internet was $55.25. If the internet was $19.95, what is the cost of the phone service? Again, the parts equaling the whole. So I'm just going to write this up as the internet. Well, I'm going to go to the variable first. Doesn't matter which way I do it, but I like to do the variable first. So I'm going to do the phone service first. So I'm going to do P plus $19.95 equals, and then my total cost of my bill was 55, or Tyrone's bill was $55.25. Now, I'm going to solve this. Again, I'm adding up my phone and my internet service to equal my total cost. So now I'm going to subtract. So I'm going to subtract $19.95 from this side. I'm going to subtract $19.95 from that side. You can use your calculators to get this, but you're going to get P equals, all right, the 5s are going to become zeros there. And then you got to borrow, so that's going to be 12, and that's 3. And then you got to borrow, that's 14, decimal point. So that's going to be a 5. And then you borrowed, so that's a 4 minus 1 is 35.30. Okay, which is really just $20 minus, and then you add the 5 cents because it's only $19.95, not $20. Excuse me, that is a word problem. So let's not forget our dollar sign. Okay, the cost of the phone service is $35.30. Again, I really want you to focus on writing these equations. You'll have a lot of problems with writing equations. So this is for adding and subtracting. Same process for both of them, just sometimes you're adding, sometimes you're subtracting. Your goal is the same. You want to get that number that's on the same side as the variable, you want to get that to 0. So you want to get the variable by itself, so you have to add or subtract the number that's on the same side to get it to 0. Okay? Have a great night, and I will see you guys tomorrow in class for our practice problems.